Hey APUS History, welcome back to our next screencast installment. Today's topic is going to be the Civil War. So for quite some time in our class, we've been talking about the buildup of the Civil War, really for a couple of weeks now, and kind of all of the problems that are leading to drift to the North and the South drifting apart in the 1840s and 1850s. So by 1861, the differences have become so great that they cannot reconcile themselves in some kind of peaceful way. And so it's going to lead to a war between North and South. So the title for our lecture today is going to be Brother versus Brother. And this is meant symbolically, figuratively, and also very literally. If you look at the North and the South, both the North and the South, our histories are intertwined. They're not two separate histories. They both can trace their ancestors back to the American Revolution, to the founding of the country. You have very famous Americans who were instrumental in the Constitution, instrumental in the Declaration of Independence, who are from the South. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, some of our most famous Americans ever. And we have very famous Americans from the founding fathers generation in the North. John Adams, Alexander Hamilton. And so the history is intertwined with one another. And that's, to me, one of the big reasons why this is such a sad time in American history. The fact that they couldn't reconcile their differences, they couldn't find a compromise like the earlier generations could. But I kind of like to think of it as they had to fight this war, and we had to fight this war to kind of come out a stronger union, a better union, and a purer democracy in the end. Now, literally, brother fighting brother. Some of the stories are really interesting here. So let's take a look at some famous people, actually. Mary Todd Lincoln. This is going to be Abraham Lincoln's wife. Now, she has three brothers. All three of her brothers fight and die for the Confederate Army. Varina Davis. This is going to be Jefferson Davis's wife, the president of the Confederate States of America. A couple of her relatives fight for the Union. John Crittenden, a senator who tries, before the Civil War breaks out, to kind of propose a compromise. He has two sons. One is going to be a Union colonel, one is going to be a Confederate colonel. So split up of one family fighting on both sides. Robert E. Lee, he has a nephew who actually fights for the Union, and Robert E. Lee goes into battle against his nephew. George McClellan. Now, not only do you have brother fighting brother, but you have on both sides some very interesting viewpoints. So George McClellan's a good example of this. He's a Union general, but his personal opinion is that we shouldn't even be fighting the Civil War. He thinks that we should just let the South leave, just let them go. Sam Houston, famous Southerner, part of the annexation of Texas and the Texas independence movement, he believed that Texas and the entire South should be staying in the Union. So again, this is very complex. It's not as simple as all of the South is for this and all of the North is against it. You have complexities here. Some Southerners don't want to secede from the Union. Some Northerners think that we shouldn't even try and save the South. So there's a lot of things kind of going on here. So if you look at the actual breakdown here of these two sides of the country, these two sections of the country, I'm gonna call the North a juggernaut here because the North has a ton of things kind of working for it, and the South also has some things working for it too. So we're going to try and get into some of the specifics here. So if you look up here at the scoreboard, we're going to kind of zoom in and kind of get a good idea of what does each side have working for it. What are some of the advantages that the Confederates have? What are some of the advantages that the Union has? Now, if I was you, at some point I would pause right here and maybe just kind of take some notes on on this chart, because this chart gives you a lot of information here. So really what you should stand out to you, what stands out to me. If you look at the blue here, the blue represents the United States, the Union, and the tan represents the Confederate States. The Union has a tremendous advantage in almost all areas. We're looking at infrastructure here, industrial capacity, and manpower. So let's first start with that left-hand column with manpower. As far as pure numbers here, the North has about 20 million people or so, and the South is going to have about 6 million free whites. They have about 3.5 million slaves. So combined, even counting the slave population, the North outnumbers them about a little bit more than 2 to 1. So Huge advantage as far as manpower is concerned. And that means two things. Number one, production capacity, using men and women to make things to help you win the war. And two, just soldiers on the ground. The North is going to have an extreme advantage of how many soldiers they could actually put on the battlefield. The middle column. The middle column is really showing you industrial capacity. And as we learned before, the North dominates in an industrial way. So they have far more production, and really the thing that I look at that stands out to me is firearm production. 32 to 1. I believe there's only one gun factory in the entire South. So the North has an extreme advantage as far as this is concerned. All the way on the right-hand side, farm acreage. The North has an extreme advantage as far as farming and livestock is concerned as well. So we often kind of think of the South as more agrarian, more rural than the North. They are agrarian and they are rural. There's a lot less cities, but the North actually has more farmland, and more farmland than I would say is going to help you in a war. There's differences between the types of farmland that they have or what they grow there. The North is growing foodstuffs, wheat. They're using it to raise livestock. The South is predominantly using their land for cotton. And the South's going to learn very quickly you can't eat cotton. And so this is going to be another big advantage that the North has over the South. So if you look at the Civil War, the North has all of these advantages, but the Civil War lasts 4 long, very, very bloody years. So the question that should be going through your mind is, how does the South hang in for so long? What did they have going for them? How did they hang in with the North for 4 years? Why isn't this war over quickly in 1 year? So the South does have some things going for it. The number one thing that the South has going for it is what they have to achieve in the war is very different than what the North has to achieve. All the South has to do is not lose. And that might sound kind of strange, but they don't have to invade the North. All they have to do is kind of preserve their army, just like America during the American Revolution. All Washington had to do is keep the army going and kind of tire out the North. That's all they have to do. They don't have to go in and invade and conquer the entire North. They just have to make the North quit and make the North allow them to secede. So that's a much easier task than what the North has to do. The North has to go into the South and conquer it and force the South to come back into the Union. Second thing that they have going for them is they have excellent military leadership. So they have a disproportionate amount of military generals before the Union broke up. A lot of military generals came from the South. So some famous ones are Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, but overwhelmingly they have pretty good military leadership. So they have good tactics, good strategies, and good leadership. And so those are two of the things that they really kind of have working for them in the South. Now, the common Southerner, let's talk about the common Southerner for a second. How the South is going to paint this war. They paint it very different than the North paints it. They're going to call it the War of Northern Aggression. And they're going to try and sell this to the common Southerner, that the North is invading the South and is invading our states. So why did the common Southerner join? If the common Southerner did not own a slave, and most Southerners did not, why did they go fight? They have 90% participation in the war in the South. So why were the Southerners going to fight? Well, the number one reason that they're going to fight is to defend their homes, to defend their families, to defend their states. They feel like the North is invading them and imposing upon them again. And so they feel like they have to go out and defend their Southern heritage and defend their Southern states. So that is the number one reason why they're going to go out and they're going to fight. Now, the North, kind of on the flip side. The North has advantages in a different way. So they have all that industrial advantage, but they also have leadership advantage too. Not military leadership until later in the war when Grant kind of takes on the leader of the Potomac Army. Early on, though, and throughout the war, they have Abraham Lincoln. They have superior political leadership. He is a much stronger and much more in-depth political leader than Jefferson Davis. And plus, he has a lot of advantages. He does not have to create a government from scratch on the fly while he's fighting a war. So he has kind of the structures of the United States government already in place and working for him. The North also is going to have a lot more money, a lot more funding. And so for anybody out there who knows that you've ever tried to do something as far as get an organization going or maybe a team or something like that, money plays a big role. And so the North has a lot more money to fund their soldiers, to equip their soldiers, to feed their soldiers than the South does. They have a monetary advantage and a political leadership advantage. Now, why did the common Northerner fight in the war? The number one reason, if you could look at the political cartoon there, it should remind you of Andrew Jackson when we talked about the National Bank and his war with the banks. But the many-headed monster here is secession. And what that club says is union. The common Northerner is going to fight to preserve the Union, to keep the country together. And that's going to be the belief that Abraham Lincoln and the government is going to espouse to the people. We are fighting this war to save our country, to keep the greatness of America, to keep our country together. Now, there are also going to be people who are going to get involved, for the slavery reason, for the abolitionist reason. But primarily, the common Northerner, he's going to get involved to preserve the Union. So tomorrow in class, what we're going to pick up with is kind of a little bit more analysis about who you think has the advantages in this war, and kind of we're going to get into some of the battles of the Civil War and kind of how difficult some of the battles are and how destructive some of the battles are. So have a good night, and I'll see you guys tomorrow in class.